Dogleg Brewery in Fort Worth, Texas. This is You Can't Brew That on Television. Now here are your hosts, the Reverend Ryan Bono and Kyle Brewdog LaPointe.
Hello, beer lovers, and welcome to a hopefully glitch-free episode of You Can't Brew That on Television. We are your hosts. I am the Reverend Ryan Bono.
And I am Kyle. What did I watch last? Man, I'm
The
just
Lion
doing
King
bad.
3D? Was it
Lion King 3D.
awesome?
No, actually,
was that a good? Was it a
Good choice.
I'm watching a movie right now with the dude from Frasier, the show
The
Frasier,
racist one?
and he's got
I'm
the
thinking
little,
Seinfeld.
the little other buddy guy from Frasier who's not Frasier.
You're watching Frasier.
No, I'm watching this movie where basically this guy robs a bank and he goes and breaks into that guy's house or sneaks in there, and then he's going to be taking him over and taking his house over, except for that guy is a serial killer and he drugs him and then begins to serial kill him. I'm only halfway through it. It's very entertaining thus far.
LaPointe.
LaPointe.
And welcome to another exciting episode of You Can't Brew That on Television, where we will help you bridge the gap between beer snob and frat boy. We have a jam-packed episode for you tonight, because we're going to try to fit last week's episode in with this week's episode. We're going to drop a few things, but let's get started, and I think the best way to get started is by drinking beer.
I thought you were going to say the best way was to drop a beat.
No, I think that the best way is to... Actually, dropping a beat would be kind of fun. I'm not even good at it, though.
I wasn't going to try.
All right, so tonight's first beer is Ugly Pug.
By Rare.
By Rar Brewing, right here in beautiful Fort Worth, Texas. This is a really, really good beer.
It's a Schwartz beer.
It is a Schwartz
German
beer.
black beer.
Look, yeah, go ahead and talk a
Great
little bit
degrees.
about
So
that.
German black beer. It's basically it's a very dark colored lager.
Yeah.
So it looks a lot bigger and beefier than it actually is. You can see it's a very brown color, dark brown, but it's not something that tastes like you would normally get with like a stout. There's not a lot of roasted flavors. It's more caramely than anything, but it uses some black burnt malt basically and changes the color to make it a lot darker. But I think they do a great job with the Pug. This is one of my favorite beers they make.
It really is a very good beer. It's clean. It's crisp. You know, I mean, it's a lager, so you expect that, but it's also got some light versions of those bigger flavors you typically will get in a stout or a porter. It's just a little bit watered down.
Yeah. Minus the roast.
Minus the roast, yeah.
There's no roast flavor.
Debittered black malt.
Yeah, they use debittered, but it's Carafa a lot, which is it's just color, man. But this style kind of, if I remember correct, came about like they found it after the Berlin Wall got knocked down, and they realized,
cool.
They're in East Berlin and in the commie world, they're brewing this really black beer that tastes awesome.
Good for the commies, right?
Yeah.
So last week you were fortunate enough to go check out what's going on down at Central Market. I believe it's called Brewtopia.
Brewtopia, yeah.
Which is their celebration of craft beer and craft brewing. I didn't get to go to that, so why don't you tell us all about it?
Lots more days left of this, or several more days at least, and I guess we've been through, we're only halfway through it, and they're going to be continuing to go on. You go on to centralmarket.com, look at any of the stores around you and see what's going on, but they have multiple brewers that are sending reps. Sometimes it's the brewer. Sometimes it's just a local rep, salesman, whatever it may be. And I spoke with the lady who's the rep for Victory in this area. Spoke with her for a long time, talked to her about their beers, and they had a new pale ale that's coming out that's really pretty tasty, and it's all Citra hops. So I mean, it's interesting. It's not my favorite flavor of a hop, but it's a good beer. And, of course, she had their Hefeweizen there, which is a solid beer. I mean, Victory they don't make bad beers. You know, they're Hop Wallop and Hop Devil. And
I was fortunate enough this past summer to try their summer selection called Summer Love, and that was a fantastic beer. I think it was kind of like it was at the Flying Saucer.
Oh, it was here?
Yeah, it was.
Okay.
It was right here, and I believe it's like a Kolsch style. It was very good.
She said that was so limited release that like most people didn't get to try it. In this
it was fantastic.
Because she said that's the best one they put out here in a while.
Yeah,
they've got a. And as she called it, a double coming out that's going to have like a smoked double.
Oh, cool.
And I was like, a smoked double. And
that sounds...
A double what? And she's like, well, it's a double. What it ends up being, it's a smoked double. So she's going for the Belgian style with smoke. I'm like, I'll give that a shot.
Yeah, that sounds like a really fun way to go. I like that.
And
that's
then I
really
went and tried Guinness, just put out a Schwartz beer, speaking of.
Did they really?
Yeah, tried that. get out of the pub. I mean, the Shorts beer, if you want something mass market, I mean, Guinness made one that's pretty decent. But, this is better.
Yeah, and more on that here in a little bit. Until then, I think that we're ready to talk about our next beer. Well, actually, no, we've got to finish
a little more
on
this one. So basically, our thought here, we're talking about something else we're going to be discussing later on the show, and that was last week with 9/11 just passing. We were trying to do an American beer theme, and that's something we'll discuss a little bit later, and why we're choosing these beers, because this is an American beer, but it's a German style, right? So that's kind of on the trend of what we're going to be talking about. But in the meantime, we've also got what we decided last week.
2 weeks ago, well, last episode.
Last full episode.
Yeah.
I don't even count last week. So
we decided that this year's style for the Brewing Bowl is going to be an alt beer.
And that was thanks to Stubby. Stubby's a big German beer fan, so he said, brew an alt beer.
And I thought that was a really cool idea because a lot of your average viewers of our show and even a lot of people that are really into the craft beer scene don't know a whole lot about alt beer.
Sure.
It's kind of an uncommon style. It's good.
It's one of the few beers that does what it does with the yeast, because they actually use an ale yeast, which is supposed to ferment at somewhere between 62 and 75 degrees in typical, and they ferment it at like 55 degrees, or sometimes as low as 50 degrees. And so they get a much cleaner fermentation, takes longer, but they're basically turning it into a lager yeast. So it's really interesting. You get a different range of flavors because you still get the yeast character, but it's much more mitigated.
And as we talk about from time to time, when you take a yeast whose operating temperature is supposed to be in a particular range and force it to ferment out of its range, or kind of at the extreme end of its range, which is what's going on with the alt yeast, you get some flavors in there that sometimes aren't necessarily desirable, but sometimes in a situation like alt beer, that's the style. That's the way the style was made historically.
It's like when we try to get Bono to sing countertenor. You don't expect him to do that, but
it's weird when it does happen.
But it can be heavenly.
No, I don't think that it can, actually. And on that note, I think it is time to open another beer. So you need to hurry up and finish that one. Tonight's second selection is Lobotomy Bach, which comes to us from the Indian Wells Brewing Company in California.
And this is one we actually did try last week. I switched up my selections. Bono still had some left over from his. But we tried this, and our thoughts on it is it's not a terrible beer, but it tries to claim that it's 10.5% alcohol, but
which we're not really buying. And they also claim to be a Doppelbock, which I'm not really buying. But I think that kind of where that comes from is this is a little too heavy to be a traditional Bock, but it's definitely not quite heavy enough to be a traditional Doppelbock. I mean, it's sort of in between.
And I think it's more, if anything, it just has that alcohol flavor.
Yeah, it really does.
You get that alcohol flavor from it in the smell, and that's not really supposed to be in a Bock.
No, certainly not, and you do get it a lot in the aroma.
Right. So, maybe they just hammed it up like that. Maybe they did make a 10.5 one time. But
if they did, if this is 10.5, it is hidden very, very well. But
Ryan Faulkner, who does a sports show on FrontierTelevision.com, also at one point used 10.5 to describe himself, and turns out he was lying.
Oh, cool.
So,
so they might be lying as well. Right. They wouldn't have made it up.
Right. So, that just happens. But, no, this is a decent beer.
I like drinking it. I really do.
It's not bad. I'm kind of ashamed that they advertise it at 10.5, but hey, maybe we're wrong. Maybe the fact that, we've only judged a few hundred beers makes it where...
We think we know everything just because we've judged a few hundred beers. But, it's possible that they just hide the flavor of the alcohol and the burn extraordinarily well.
Sure. I doubt it.
Yeah, I doubt it as well, but you never know.
Yep. And speaking of, I'll just derail and go ahead and talk about it, but did a BJCP class, that Bono just took. There was a test portion for it after it was complete. Not many people were doing the test, but I went in and did just the tasting portion again. I think I did pretty good. So we'll be looking forward to seeing the results. It should raise my rank in BJCP, so I may be a yellow belt here shortly. But
a yellow belt beer judge, everybody. I think we should have an episode sometime in the future where we talk about the BJCP like the actual judging and becoming a judge and things like that, because I've heard a lot of people want to know about that. So
sure, and it's something
I think we could expand that into a full show sometime in the future.
Without a doubt, yeah, and it's something you can do wherever you're at. Most likely, there's going to be a group of judges around there, and if not, it's a heck of a drive. I would, if I were in college and I knew what BJCP judging was, and I knew the only place to do it was to drive back to Fort Worth on a Thursday night, I would have done it every other Thursday night to come take this class.
Wow.
I mean,
I wouldn't have. You're a lot more dedicated than I am.
But I usually played hockey down here twice a week.
That's true. You're down
I was driving this. I was putting 40,000 miles on my truck just trying to drive down here to play good hockey. So same thing goes. Well, I'm in Oklahoma. I'll drive 3 hours to drink good beer.
Okay, fair enough.
I'm just saying. Now I wouldn't. There's no way because I have more access to good beer, so I wouldn't do it. But back then,
different
I probably
story.
would have.
So let's talk a little bit more about alt beer.
Okay.
I picked up a book on Amazon.com, and Rich, if you could show the title of that book, I believe we got a JPEG of that.
It should be up there somewhere.
Coming at you.
We picked up this book to help us study for the show, and it's part of a series of books that I've read over the years. I read the one about barley wine and the stout book, and to get ready for this year's Brew and Bowl, I went ahead and picked up the alt beer book. Dove into the history portion. We all know I love the history of beers. I like looking at how these beers came about throughout time. And so far, what I've discovered has been really fascinating about the way that beer flavors can sometimes come about by legislation rather than what people actually want to taste.
I think you're probably looking at the large majority of them come about because of legislation. The percentage-wise.
Probably, and maybe not direct legislation like you had in Germany, but, in England you had indirect legislation by levying large taxes on the alcohol percentage of beers. And so in Germany, the Reinheitsgebot is somewhat well-known. Everybody knows.
Yeah, everybody knows.
Everybody knows that. The Bavarian rulers were very upset by people making low quality beers, and so they decided to regulate the ingredients that go into beer. And this came about in 1516 that they passed this law that mandated that only water, barley, and hops could go into a beer. And then they still were having problems with quality. And in Bavaria, they figured out that beers made during the summer weren't as good as beers made during the winter.
So what did they do?
So they mandated that you can only brew beer in the winter.
They declared it winter year-round.
No brewing in the summer.
No brewing in the summer. So this naturally led to lager beer becoming the only beer made in the bulk of Germany and in Bavaria.
Just because that was the predominant yeast in the area.
That's the predominant yeast, and that's the beer that would ferment best during the winter.
It was when the basically early 1800s, late 1700s, when they figured out
it was
that there was other yeasts around, or was it late 1800s?
I know yeast was discovered in the middle 1700s.
Is that when it was?
Yeah.
It was pasture that actually made it popular, right?
I believe so.
Who invented the way to kill all the good things in milk,
right,
and make it a horrible thing.
Right, that's the guy.
Yeah, I knew that guy.
So without realizing it, the Bavarian rulers had essentially outlawed ale. Now, in the north, in the Rhineland region of Germany, where Dusseldorf is, and we'll get to Dusseldorf here in a minute, but Cologne was also there. Mm-hmm. They didn't have to follow the Bavarian. They didn't have to follow the Bavarian rules, so they continued brewing during the summer, and they had cooler summers up there. So they were actually able to make ales because their cooler summers lent themselves to ale fermenting. And then I'm gonna go figure out where I lost my place.
You're basically saying up north now they're able to make beers with ale yeast.
Yes.
And so you've got one area of the country that's making it with ale yeast and one area that's making it with lager yeast. But in general, those beers that were being made with ale yeast up north were still being lagered, per se.
Yes, they really were, because the summers were so much cooler there. And in the north, they could have made lager beer. But the taste, the prevailing taste of the region, people wanted to drink the ale yeast that was coming out of Dusseldorf.
Sure, and it's a fruitier flavor. It's got more flavor. Most of the time, the thing that people like to advertise about the lager beers is clean, crisp, refreshing, all these things that, well, they pretty much say no taste, right? I mean, you would say white bread is clean, crisp, and refreshing, except that you would say, oh, but that big loaf of French bread is a hell of a lot tastier.
Exactly.
So
and so they were longing for that bigger ale taste. Now, that ale taste actually became mandated in Dusseldorf even when they passed their own version of the Reinheitsgebot in 1706 that actually mandated top fermented beer.
there you go.
And so here we have just two parts of the same country that one of them is drinking lager like it's going out of style, and then the other one has completely fallen in love with ale. And this all came about partially because of geography, but mostly because of legislation. And so alt beer is traditionally fermented or
Cool.
Whoa.
Styles.
That was awesome. Skype just kind of totally scrambled that last sentence, and I was kind of hanging on it. So in general, start over again.
I don't even remember where it was.
He was saying, in general,
what we've learned is that
It just kind of sounded like, whoa.
well, that's what he said.
yeah, how did you not know that that's what I
So in general,
He was saying, actually, let me rephrase that. In general,
That's better?
okay, thank you.
I couldn't have said it
I'm just
better
trying to take
myself.
this down for the transcription.
That's spelled.
you have to shake your lips
That's
while you're
spelled
doing it.
WULWUL.
So,
Are you getting this? Yeah. So what we've learned is that in this particular instance,
well, I haven't learned. I've listened, but I haven't learned.
geography partially affected the drinking taste of a culture, but more importantly, legislation sort of mandated what they were going to be drinking.
Governments, they pick what we drink, man.
They really do, and we see this again and again throughout the historical development of various beers.
That's why I drink nothing but government cola. It's delicious.
It is.
I may have talked about this before, but I highly recommend a book called A World in Six Glasses, or a History of the World in Six Glasses. I think that's what it's called. Very cool how it demonstrates, the differences between, when things switched from beer to wine to distilled liquors to teas to coffees to, and all the way through to cola. And now, this day and age, the moneymaker's water.
Yeah, it really is, isn't it? I mean,
so-
they're making money hand over fist on water.
Yeah, and
It's
sometimes
quite amazing.
Sometimes it's oh yeah, we've got spring water, right? And so here comes the spring water straight from the water treatment plant being piped into the back of their deal. But they filter it a couple times, and sometimes they mix in a little spring water. So hey, spring water, right?
It's springish.
We should drink another beer.
I'm leaning towards that idea. I think that's a really great idea. Kyle selected the third beer for tonight. So Kyle, why don't you tell us a little bit about this?
That's St. Arnold's Brown. It is what it is. St. Arnold's, I believe it's an English style brown. I'm fairly certain that it's a Northern English brown, but it may be more Americanized. It's been a long time since I've had it, but I'll try it here right now and let you know.
I'm sure I've had this, but I don't remember.
It's one of those beers that's, if I remember correct, it's not a beer that you go, man, I don't want that again, but it's not a beer that you clamor to
That you
have
just have
over
to
and
have
over
again.
But it may be more Americanized. I can smell some fruit.
Yeah, I
in
was
there.
just gonna say that there's a little bit of hop jumping out of that you really don't expect out of a Northern or
Yeah,
even
that's-
Southern English.
And it's kind of a mix. I mean, because
Citrus and grass.
it's you got citrus, grass, a little bit of earthiness from the hops. I mean, like they use some English hops, but they also use a little bit of American hops.
It's a nice mixed brown ale, I think.
It's very good
I wouldn't
beer.
call this English or American, but I definitely call it delicious.
Yeah, it's really good. And maybe that's why, maybe I was in the mood for an American brown when I had it last, because I can't say I've had this a lot. So, maybe
I like
wasn't
it.
hit my palate, but dude, this is pretty good beer.
Yeah.
So, highly recommend the St. Arnold's Brown. So, again, we're talking about beers that we're having, right, that are American beers that can be traced back to their lineage in Europe, or Europea, as it's often.
It is called Europea, I think is really what it is. I have a friend who's from Hungary.
Right.
That's what she always calls it.
Right, Hungary.
Yeah.
And that's right next to Swedeland, right?
No, it's below it,
Okay.
kind of like off to the right a little.
A little bit to the right.
So, but we are discussing American versions of European beers, and specifically, we're looking at how. Oh, here it is. we're very excited tonight to bring you descriptions of ways you can help get America's economy moving with craft beer.
And now, before we get into how you can get America's economy moving, I do have to mention that today is National Talk Like a Pirate Day.
Arr,
I totally forgot, but it's National Talk Like a Pirate Day. So we're not going to do that, but
No,
we're
So that's not
Anyway.
going to be happening.
maybe
Smoke 'em if you get 'em.
them.
So we're just talking, right, about, okay, well, 9/11 was coming up, and we were all, we're working on our brewery.
Yeah, on 9/11,
yeah. Reminiscing. We were all talking about where we were, where we weren't, what we were thinking, what we weren't, who lied to what teacher, that kind of thing. But we basically said, let's go ahead and discuss what this really means. A 10-year celebration of a horrible attack on our country, and it basically means that we now need to focus on America again. We need to refocus, just like we did it after 9/11. We focused on America. Things got better in our economy and everything. People were really in a more giving mood, and things just looked great for about the next 5 years.
And we're thinking that with the economy sagging, with things kind of in the doldrums a little bit here lately, we're probably going to start seeing a renewed push. Like you had in like the mid-90s, we're probably going to start seeing a renewed push to buy American. And what better way to start buying American than with American beer?
Yep.
So this is why we selected tonight's styles.
Sure.
And let's talk about a couple of these styles, and then we'll discuss. We dug up an interesting article last week about American beer tastes, kind of how the way they're changing. So let's start with the Ugly Pug.
And the Ugly Pug is, like we said, it's an Eastern Germany origin beer. It's a Schwarz beer. It's a dark beer. But what you can do is you can go to the bjcp.org. Great resources there. One of them is their judging book. The 2008 is the last one they've done. The 2008 is one thing they do about it is they describe the beer in detail and in mind-numbing detail. But
it gets pretty bad sometimes.
If you don't want to go to that much detail in reading that, we're actually going to be publishing a simplified version of this one of these days, and I'm probably a third of the way through it, but we'll keep going on it. We'll get it.
And by publishing, he means on the internet.
Yes, it will be published on the interweb. So
this beautiful 36-volume handcrafted.
And if you just buy the first half, we'll gladly give your money back if you can return it within 30 seconds. But we don't accept anything mailed beyond 4 o'clock on Friday.
Too late. You didn't return it.
Okay, so it's obviously been committed that you're going to buy our book.
Clearly.
And
thank you. We thank you in advance.
The idea, though, is you can look at this BJCP style guidelines, and you can look at the bottom where it says classic examples.
And so, for example, we're going to start with dry stout.
Okay.
Kyle, what is your favorite international dry stout? Just,
I mean, you're going to say Guinness.
Guinness.
I mean,
Well,
Murphy's is really good.
Everybody
too.
loves Guinness. Murphy's. I actually really like Beamish, and it might make me a bad Irishman for saying that, but I really like Beamish.
Yeah, well,
so you know that's a dry stout, and you want to try an American version of one of these Irish dry stouts. So you go to the BJCP style guidelines, and you go to number 13A, and you skip past all the technical mumbo jumbo.
500 paragraphs of all of the descriptions.
Like we said, they get very involved. But at the bottom, there is a paragraph entitled Commercial Examples. And you go through there, you see Guinness, you see Murphy's, O'Hara's, you see a lot of foreign stuff. But then you start getting to the Goose Island, which is a very good stout.
Yeah, it's conglomerate owned these days. It's semi-American though. I'm pretty sure it's American.
And they also list Brooklyn Dry Stout, which is American owned.
Yeah, and Brooklyn is just a fantastic brewery. They make some really good beers.
So this is a really useful way, and you can get the same information on the internet.
Yeah, and
so
you
go to bjcp.org.
So what we're trying to get at here is there's alternatives to just drinking that beer that you love. Just because you love Guinness, right, or just because you love Pilsner or Kel, you can have these flavors and you can get them locally. You can get them from brew pubs. You can get them from breweries in not only your area, but if you have trouble getting beers in your area, they ship from Colorado, California, The Northeast has a lot of really good breweries, and then the Southeast does, man. I mean, the Carolinas and
It's
Georgia.
it's really starting up in the Southeast. I mean, they've been a little late to the game, but they are catching up pretty fast.
They came prepared.
Yeah. So last week, well, let's talk about the lobotomy Bock before we move into our stats and numbers and sort of boring stuff.
Okay.
Like we said earlier, this is a Bock. This is German style beer. So this is something that you might use to replace
Like a Polliner or a Salvator.
Salvator, that's what I was looking for. Yeah, most of those German breweries do make a Bock or a Doppelbock of some sort.
Any that end in Ader is probably going to be a Doppelbock, which is what this is supposed to be. But I wouldn't really replace Doppelbock. I wouldn't replace Salvator.
I definitely wouldn't take this as a replacement for Optimator.
Right. Yeah, I'm glad you guys said that. I'm like, I love America, but
yeah. Well, I mean, there's American beers that would do it. It's
there
just
are
this
some great American Doppelbocks.
Can I afford them?
Why don't you go ahead and look up Doppelbock while I'm talking about the numbers that we looked up last week about how American tastes in beer have been changing over the last half decade or so. This article just came out last week, and it looks at the time period between 2005 and 2010. And during that time, Americans drank an average increase of about 2 million barrels of beer a year. In 2010, Americans drank 2 million barrels of beer a year more than in 2005. So we're drinking more beer. And that's exciting, right? I mean, that's really good.
Industry, that's good.
Yeah.
In general. 8
of the biggest 23 breweries in America saw a 30% or more decrease in the amount of beer that they're selling. That's 8 out of 23. Budweiser alone saw a 30% decline, and I believe it was Miller saw a 70% decline. I mean, the numbers are just staggering.
The one that bugged me the most was the one that saw the most decline, which was Budweiser's version of craft beer, Michelob.
Yeah, okay, Michelob. I'm sorry, it wasn't Miller. Yeah, it was Michelob. That saw a 70 or 78% decrease in its consumption. Now, 10 million fewer barrels overall of the top 20 suppliers, the top 20 brands were consumed in 2010. So Americans are drinking more beer, but they're drinking less beer from the big breweries. And that's kind of exciting if you're a craft beer fan or an import beer fan.
It's almost like if you read into those details in depth, you almost see that basically it's like the waters are parting. And you've got the people that are drinking, that like cheap beer, are going to the cheapest beer.
Yeah.
And the people that like good beer are going to the best good beer. And they're kind of leaving what's in the middle to the dogs.
And they're really also not only gravitating towards the necessarily cheap beers, but the beers with the least flavor and the lowest calories.
Yeah.
Because Bud Light didn't lose any, or Bud Light sales stayed constant.
Budweiser increased, right?
Budweiser plummeted, Miller Lite increased, Bud Light stayed steady. So people are gravitating towards those lighter flavor, lower calorie beers. And
so I guess that's where I'm going. The people that drank Budweiser because it was that big, flavorful beer have probably made the jump to craft brewing.
Yeah.
And gone, wow, that's not only big and flavorful, but it's actually good. And then those people that were drinking Budweiser because that was all that was available and it was the same price as Bud Light, well, now it's a little more than Bud Light, and they go, well, I'd rather have the Bud Light because they put the calories on the can, and that's how many it has. And everybody knows that the best way to judge how you're actually going to be able to digest food is how well it burns. And so, calories are a great way to look at it.
Yeah, absolutely. So what did you find out about Bock and Doppelbock?
It's just one of those styles that it's very, very German. So
it's very German.
But there are a couple on here. Sam Adams Doppelbock, which I've never had.
Okay.
But they've also have Capital Autumnal Fire. And
Capital is a good brewery.
I've had that beer, and it is fantastic.
So some really good examples of American Doppelbocks. Thank you, Rich, for calling us on that.
If you can get Capital, you don't get it everywhere, but if you can get that brewery makes.
Strongly recommend.
This is just my absolute favorite time of the year, and the Oktoberfest thing probably plays more to that than it should. But yeah, I mean, I just love being able to go after these beers and find them everywhere and have an excuse to drink them. When are we going out to do some Oktoberfesting? We didn't go this weekend for Addison over here because we got
I
rain
almost
bombed.
did. I was going to go over there and watch that. Apparently, Kevin Berger now lives only about like 2/4 of a mile from where that is.
Friend of the show.
Which is close to a half a mile.
Yeah.
And so I was going to go do that, but it just didn't work out with the kiddo. And, she had been sleeping poorly, so we didn't want to stay out till 11 at night and have my wife drive me home because that would have happened.
I was going to go, but then I realized that it would involve going to Addison.
Yeah.
So I turned that idea down. So our fourth beer for tonight is the Oscar Blues Old Chub Scotch Ale, which, as the name implies, is a Scotch ale.
Which is a suburb of Ireland.
It is a suburb of Ireland. It's a little to the east.
Right.
Which is to the right, which is the right to you and me.
Or the East Side, as they're known.
We've all discussed it. They're all part of a great kingdom of
all right,
countries.
that's enough. And for those of you that were with us last year, we did make a Scotch ale for our brewing bowl, and it was delicious.
One of the best beers we've ever made.
Yeah, and really, I was so fascinated by the history, and I loved the beer itself so much that I've become a really huge fan of Scotch ale. I've been downing a lot of Bellhaven Wee Heavy over the last year or so. And, it occurred to me that I should probably be buying, I'm not going to buy exclusively the American version, but I should be buying an American version more often.
Sure.
So I found the Oscar Blues Old Chub, which is a really, really good substitute, I think. I mean, this is a great beer.
Yeah.
It's very, it's almost like syrupy. It's got a really big mouthfeel.
And that's, if there was one thing I would change about our Brew Bowl from last year, I would get an even bigger, thicker mouthfeel.
Yeah.
But I don't, we didn't do it. I don't know how we could have with what brewing methods we were using because the decoction mash thins it out.
Yeah, it really does.
So I don't necessarily know that this is actually right for style when you want to talk about how it is thick and it can be. It's at the bitter ends of the style is where it's at. I mean, it's as far away from what we made as you can make, but ours had more alcohol bite, had more caramel flavor, but it was way thinner with the mouthfeel.
Yeah,
so
yeah, it really was. This is a fantastic beer, though, and ours was also fantastic, I thought.
Yeah.
But, again, just opposite sides of the same style.
And usually if you're trying to brew something to win a competition, you want to err on the side of bigger everything.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they often have...
and you're talking about beer, right?
Right.
Okay.
Right. Well, or just the
Miss
brewer
America.
in general. I've seen some really fat brewers make some really good beers. So...
Is Nick into brewing now?
I don't know.
What's he calling?
Well, he's not. He lives in Canada now, right?
Oh, yeah, he does.
Pretty close to it.
So,
I've heard Washington seceded. Seceded? Is that right?
Yeah, I think it's assessed. Look, this is getting ridiculous. What did we learn tonight?
Not much.
Well, we learned that alt beer has a lot of history, and you know it all.
And it happened a long time ago.
In Germany.
In German land,
right.
Which is where the Deutsch come from.
Mm-hmm. We learned about 4 different beers that we can get in America that are styles that you can get in other countries.
Absolutely. And this is only the tip of the iceberg. I mean, the overwhelming majority of international styles have counterparts here in America. And there's only 1 or 2 that don't, that I can think of. And one of them is actually very dismaying to me because I love English mild. But it's just hard to find.
It's hard to ship.
Yeah, it is hard to ship.
You've got to have a place that you can actually tap it and drink it in a week.
Yep.
So, and that's something maybe the clubhouse gets going for the elite membership of the Cap and Hair, which,
that would be really cool.
I'm sure there will be cask tapped all the time.
Awesome. So we learned that Americans are drinking less Budweiser.
But they're drinking more craft brew.
Yeah,
they're
absolutely.
drinking also more Miller Lite. Maybe not as good a thing, but hey.
Whatever. So some people are going to move that way, and some people are going to move the other way.
Shift.
We learned there's a shifting of the tide.
Right. Then, so the middle of the pack, you're going away.
Yeah. So what are we up to next week?
Well, we're going to do our food pairing. We haven't done one of these yet this year, so we're going to do a food pairing.
First one of the season.
It's going to be fun. I'm going to go ahead. I'll try to get together all the recipes tonight and post them tomorrow. So if anybody wants to make these things, we'll post them on our website /Facebook page. And basically, we're going to make a bunch of German Oktoberfest-style recipes. Of course, we're going to have bratwurst. I got a potato recipe. I think it was like an onion soup of some sort.
Nice.
Some really good. Every one of these recipes has beer in the recipe. So they will all be made with beer.
And then we're going to pair beers with them.
And we're going to pair beers with the food we made with beers. So there will be a lot of beers involved in that meal.
So be sure to join us next Monday when we have Oktoberfest here at Dogleg Brewery.
And remember, folks,
that we are not professionals.
So please try this at home.
Agitation, frustration, the memorization of the things I'm gonna
it was getting retarded.
This magical and powerful addiction to the pain affliction on your porcelain skin.